conversation. Um, I'm Dr. Jillian Goddard. I'm an endocrinologist and the author of the Savvy Patient Substack and the forthcoming book, The Hormone Loop. And I'm so
Mhm.
excited today that I am talking with Catherine Price. Catherine, you want to introduce yourself to everyone?
Sure. And I want to hear more about your book. But
Yeah.
I'm Catherine Price. I write the How to Feel Alive Substack, and I've been a fan of Jillian's for a long time. And I'm also the author of books, including I have them on my desk next to me. How to Break Up with Your Phone, the sequel to that, essentially, The Power of Fun, and then a new one that I co-authored with Jonathan Haidt called The
Yeah.
Amazing Generation, which is for kids and teens. So I'm really
Yeah.
excited to be here today. And I have type 1 diabetes and I love endocrinology. So I'm just very excited to be here.
Yeah, well, I'm so excited to have you. I think we have some mutual admiration, which is great. So I thought we'd kick off our conversation today talking a little bit about hormones and brain chemistry and how that affects our relationship with technology. I thought, you know, I think one of the things that we are realizing in my field is that as our hormones shift in midlife, that doesn't just affect, our menstrual cycles and our how the temperature that we feel it is in a room, but it actually affects our brains and how our brains work. And that is something that we don't know enough about yet, but that we are really learning. And I think to kind of frame this conversation, it's helpful to know that we think that estrogen, which is, so important in women's lives, we think that estrogen actually potentiates the action of dopamine in the
Hmm.
brain, and that when estrogen levels drop, dopamine can be less potent. So that has effects on our alertness, and it has effects on our executive function. It may be part of the reason why we struggle with brain fog and mood changes. But I want to think a little bit about how that might interact with our relationship with technology because and I'd love for you to talk about how certain things, social media being one of them, um, what's going on in our brains that makes those things attractive? Because I think there's some crossover here and some things that might make social media especially attractive in midlife because of these changes.
Wow, that's really interesting. For that, I love a conversation that starts with estrogen. I don't know if I've ever been in a conversation that started so quickly with estrogen, even in my gynecologist appointment. Anyway, can I start with a question to you, though, just to clarify what
Yeah,
you're saying? So you're saying that a
yeah,
drop in estrogen, so estrogen, you said potentiates dopamine. Can you explain what that means in non-endocrinologist terms? And then
yeah,
how that would show, like, what does that mean? That we would need more dopamine to have the same kind of response as we go into
yeah,
perimenopause? Tell me more, and then we can
yeah,
talk about
yeah.
social media.
So what we think is that's it's a great question. So what we think is that estrogen acts as like an amplifier to dopamine. So when we have estrogen in our brain, which is women of reproductive age, we have estrogen in our brains all the time, it makes the dopamine in our brain work better. So yeah, I think that potentially we might be looking for more dopamine to stimulate to get the same response in our brain. And and I think that that's sort of interesting to me because when we think about technology and the reasons we like technology, it's often because dopamine gets stimulated in our brains, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Okay. I can ask
yeah,
you one more follow-up before I then
yeah,
go to what I was gonna say. So how do you explain dopamine to people? I get asked this question all the time, like, 'cause I know there's many misperceptions and misconceptions about dopamine, but how do you describe it
when
when you're asked that?
when I think about dopamine and the way I describe dopamine is that we both like the way it feels. It's elevating, but it also allows us to do things like direct our attention and focus. So it allows us to access um, some aspects of of the things that our brains need to do to be focused on something.
Mhm.
Um, does that make sense?
Okay. I
Yeah.
think so. Yeah, I mean, you can correct me if excuse me, you think this is wrong, but also it's a salience indicator in our brain's way of telling or recording when things are worth doing again. So it has a
Yeah.
motivation aspect to it. If you do something
Yeah.
that releases triggers your brain to release dopamine, you're going to want to seek out and do that thing again in the future, which ties
Yeah.
into social media. Yeah. So to answer your
Yeah.
question about, sorry, I've been
Yeah.
talking a lot today.
No
Um,
worries.
about social media and dopamine, I think the important thing for people to recognize is that the reason social media apps are often so hard to look away from is that they're deliberately engineered to contain a lot of dopamine triggers, and dopamine triggers being design elements in this case that specifically are
Yeah.
there because they trigger our brains to release dopamine. And I think it's
Yeah.
also important to recognize that the people who are making social media apps in many cases are copying these dopamine triggers from a different industry that uses them all the time to hook people, which is the gambling industry and specifically slot machine makers, which is a
Yeah.
big thing to be aware of because slot machines are some of the most addictive machines ever to have been invented. And they use these dopamine triggers to get people to sit in front of the slot machine and just keep putting money into it. I was going to say
Yeah.
pumping quarters into it, but I feel like now you don't
It's
actually
probably
put
not a
quarters in.
quarter, right?
It's probably like $5 at a time. So putting money into it. And so, in the context of social media and why it is so hard to look away, it's because everything about the app is designed to trigger your brain to release dopamine.
Yeah.
And what I always say when I'm talking about dopamine is that we need dopamine. It's how we form habits. It's how we do things, how
Yeah.
we're reminded to do things that we need to do in order to survive, whether individually or as a species, like eat food or reproduce. Like those are
Yeah.
dopamine triggers. But you can have a situation in which a company just takes advantage of our brain, which is not making a
Yeah.
decision about when to release dopamine. It's releasing it
Right.
automatically when it encounters a trigger. You can take advantage of that system really easily by simply putting dopamine triggers into your product. Then the same circuitry is going to get activated, and you'll find yourself in these habit loops, compulsive habit loops in some cases, where
Yeah.
you feel like you can't break away even though you don't want to be doing it. So I'm trying to piece together in my mind as we're talking how that would tie in with what you're saying about how in perimenopause and menopause you'd have a drop obviously in estrogen levels, and so the dopamine would be less powerful. Would that mean that you would, do you think, seek the dopamine hit of social media even more and it would be harder to look away? Or would it mean that you're less pulled towards social media because there's not as much activation of dopamine? Tell me what you think.
I think we're probably pulled toward it more because
Uh-huh.
it's it's harder to get that dopamine hit excitement, because you need more of it. And so when something is very efficient at at triggering that release, I think that it becomes something that we would seek more.
Mhm.
I think that there's some other factors at play. I think there's probably some psychosocial factors as well.
Some
Um,
ennui playing a role in it.
yes.
Life feels dull. I'll turn to Instagram.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And and I think that sometimes we turn to social media because we're using it's hard to be focused on the other things that we're focused on when we're on electronics. So I'm thinking like the memo for the meeting or the project report. And we got such easy access because these devices, we like do everything on one or two devices, right? Um, and it's difficult as a working adult to escape that.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think that there's probably some aspect of that as well, right? Like, um, when we're struggling to focus, let me use an example that I think is helpful. So my mother is, she would say, very addicted to atomic fireballs.
Okay. Wasn't
And
expecting that to okay. Uh-huh.
yeah, right?
The
That's not
candies. We're
the
talking about the
candies, the
candies
hot candies.
with the sweet ones.
Yeah.
Okay.
And before she retired, she used them she would be like, "If I'm doing really something hard at work, I will get an atomic fireball and I will eat it, and it helps me focus." And my then, like, 15-year-old son was like, "That atomic fireball is triggering dopamine for you, and it's helping you focus on
Huh.
your work." And so I wonder if, as women in midlife, when we're pulled in a lot of different directions, if we're also sometimes craving the dopamine to aid us with the focus too.
Oh,
Um,
that's interesting. Although in this case, it would seem it would backfire because then you're just it's designed to suck you in. So that you end
exactly,
up not
right?
getting the that's interesting. I was also thinking it's like, what's happening when you actually seek that dopamine fix by opening, let's say, Instagram? I mean, they know
Yeah,
you're a perimenopausal woman, right? Like, I mean, I'm like, "Well, everyone's talking about perimenopause," and I'm like, "Are they? Are they
I
all
know.
really talking about it, or is it just my feed?" So, and then I think also it's like a time of life, I don't know about you, but it's hard to get your friends to get together. Everyone's dealing with parenthood and then their own parents and family stuff, and it can be quite lonely and isolating. So you're seeking
Yeah,
connection, and then you turn to a
yeah,
social media app, or you don't have these networks of family members or community. You don't feel like you're tapped into a community. So you
yeah,
look to these platforms, and then because they've got these dopamine triggers baked in, then it
yeah,
reinforces this habit loop of like, I'm going to keep checking this. And even if you know that it actually isn't fulfilling you in the way that
yeah,
you were hoping. Yeah, and there's a lot like
yeah,
you're saying, there's a lot of different things. It's like the biochemistry is one part of it, but then it's also like our emotional needs and our the ways in which we don't feel fulfilled in our
in
regular
our
life and you
midlives.
in our midlives, yeah, and then you turn to the phone and then unfortunately, at least for me, I feel like I'm never satisfied if I do that. It just kind of
Yeah.
amplifies the other areas. I mean, that's why I'm writing this How to Feel Alive Substack, right? It's like trying to solve
I
a
know, I love it.
problem.
Exactly, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about some other hormones as well that I think come
Yes,
into
let's. Oh man, this is
play.
the best. Okay.
All right, let's talk about cortisol. Um,
Next, we're going to talk about insulin, and I'm just going to like explode with excitement. Let's talk about cortisol. Okay.
let's talk about cortisol. No,
That's
I think
clickbait right there.
that
Okay. For a very small niche audience. Go on.
um so one of the things that, that happens when we're dealing with our kids and our life and our jobs and our aging parents is that we end up with sort of this chronic turned up stress response. Um and you talk about in I can't remember if it's your first book or your second book, but you talk about how when we wake up in the morning and we reach for our phone, it's probably the first book. We reach for our phone and we open our email, we also get this like surge of like cortisol that drives us down this um dissatisfied path. So I guess talk a little bit more about that and kind of why, we're reaching for our phone and yet it's making us feel stressed and it's making us not be able to really relax and so talk a little bit about that and sort of and then we're going to get into some solutions to some of these things.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. Well, first of all, I should say part of the reason I'm such a dork about the, or so excited in a dorky way, feel like in the safe space, as I wrote a whole book about vitamins and nutrition before I got into
Yeah.
phones and stuff. So I wrote a book called
Yeah.
Vitamania that was all about nutrition
Oh
and
yeah,
then
yeah,
how
yeah.
food affects your body and that. But I am
Yeah.
fascinated by cortisol and how this relates to our phones. And I'm also interested in cortisol because I do have type 1 diabetes and
Yeah.
cortisol will spike your blood sugar like, I mean, like nearly nothing else other than maybe eating a potato. So
Yes,
just
a
to
type
b
1 diabetic wearing a glucose monitor, it's like it almost has like a cortisol sensor in the glucose
it does.
monitor. It doesn't, but it
I remember
feels like it.
speaking to yeah, speaking to I think it was my someone or maybe it was my endocrinologist was saying that she had a patient whose blood sugar always dropped at a particular time of day, and then they realized it was when she got on the phone with her friends. Like, when she had and it was
Oh,
interesting, it was like the stress dropped and she became more sensitive to insulin. But anyway, so
yeah.
just to back up, and you can correct me if you would describe cortisol differently, but I always like to explain that it's one of our primary stress hormones, and
It
it helps us do things that would enable us to respond to physical threats like running away from something. So it's going to do things like
mhm,
spike your blood pressure and your heart rate and your blood glucose,
mhm,
so that you're actually able
mhm.
to respond to these threats. Obviously, really important if you're actually being chased by something in the short
Yeah,
term, but it's not
absolutely. That's exactly right.
nice. Okay, excellent. This is good. 'Cause I've been saying that for a long time, so I'm glad to hear that that's correct in your view as well as an endocrinologist. So But you can see why that would not be good in the long run if you had chronically elevated levels of cortisol, if you have an elevated, elevated blood pressure and blood glucose and
Yeah.
heart rate or what have you. Obviously, you're setting yourself up for long-term health problems. So I got
Yeah.
really interested in trying to think about what our phones and the way we use our phones might be doing to us on a hormonal level, and then therefore like
Mhm.
what effects that might have on our physical health. And then I subsequently
Yeah.
also, when I was writing The Power of Fun, got really interested in what effects having what I call true fun might have on us, which is, in my mind, this really energized, connected, fully present state. Because we should also
Mhm.
say, as a side note, that being socially isolated and feeling lonely, that actually can spike cortisol levels as well. So it's like
Absolutely.
a double whammy, right? Instead, if we talk about midlife and being a woman in
Yeah.
midlife, like feeling lonely and
Yeah.
isolated and having all these external stressors, it'd be
Yep.
very interesting if we did have a continuous cortisol, a
Right? A
different,
continuous cortisol
a
monitor.
CCM.
Well,
Yeah. Uh,
yeah, interestingly, we now think that cortisol levels in women also just like the baseline rises during perimenopause and
oh,
menopause.
really?
Yeah, so there's some theories that so as our pool of eggs is depleted, it takes more of the hormone follicle stimulating hormone to stimulate the eggs to mature. And so what happens as we go through menopause is that FSH levels, follicle stimulating hormone levels, get very high. They increase manyfold and they can stay quite high.
Hmm.
Um, we used to think that that only affected the ovary, and so these high FSH levels didn't really have any effect on the rest of our bodies for the rest of our lives. But it turns out there's FSH receptors in other places in our bodies, and one of the places where we have FSH receptors is actually in our adrenal glands, which is where we make cortisol. Um,
Oh.
and so we may be part of what drives like this metabolic change that happens in women in midlife may be a little bit of a ratcheting up of cortisol as
Oh,
well.
man, so we're already at a baseline stressed out state just because of
Yeah.
our eggs. It's our aging eggs are
Our
causing, oh, man, okay. Didn't know that. So really, we've got a trifecta, if not more, of factors influencing our
Yeah.
cortisol levels. And to
Yeah.
go back to what you were asking about, when you feel stressed out, anxiety and stress don't feel good,
Yeah.
so you try to do something to make them go away.
Yeah.
And in many cases, we try to kind of numb ourselves out or just escape from it. And what's the best escape and not the best, but the most convenient escape for most of us is just turning to the phone and starting to scroll.
Yeah.
But there's a reason that
Yeah.
there's a term doom scrolling. I've never heard of the term.
Exactly.
It doesn't occur to me. I've never heard of the term like joy scrolling, right? Like I said, like
No, never.
it's just doom scroll. So it's interesting and somewhat tragic, I think, that we turn to our phones as a self-soothing mechanism because
Yeah.
in part we feel stressed out. But what happens when you check your phone? Well, you're gonna be looking at maybe an Instagram feed where there's posts that might make you feel maybe not good about yourself, whether your
Yep.
appearance or your parenting or whatever it may be, or
Yeah.
even worse, you might look at the news and that's just going to make you talk about a cortisol spike. Like that's
Right.
another, right? So you
Right.
end up in a situation where you're not actually feeling better. You haven't
Yeah.
actually addressed that underlying anxiety. And the band-aid that you're trying to apply it's not just a band-aid, it's actually actively making the problem worse. Then you put
Yeah.
down your phone, maybe you're still in bed at this point. Now you feel like even more tired than you did when you woke up worrying about that thing at work or whatever, right? So like
Right.
we're
Right.
sabotaging ourselves, but because of that dopamine cycle and because there are so many dopamine triggers packed into these devices that have
Yeah.
manipulated our biochemistry and our brain chemistry, we get in this loop that even though we know it doesn't feel good and it doesn't leave us nourished and it makes us stressed out, the next morning we do the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. Um, so let's talk we've talked about the doom and gloom side of things. So let's talk about um, ways that people can get that feeling that they want to have. What triggers those dopamine hits in a way that feels satisfying?
Well, I think that's an excellent question for us all to be asking.
Mm.
And I'm also really fascinated by the idea that our perceived lived experience can actually reflect physiologically what's going on in our bodies. Like
Yeah.
it's not just in your head. Like if you feel really good and nourished and connected by some kind of experience, that's because some kind of chemical change happened in your body, probably with your hormones. So I just think that that's kind of
Yeah,
interesting to think about. So to answer your
it
question, I
is.
oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and I was gonna say one of the things that I think people get so frustrated with when they go to the doctor is the doctor will, they'll be like, "I'm really tired. I feel terrible. My stomach hurts, blah, 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 blah." And you can't find anything wrong with them. And the answer is like, well, maybe it's your brain, maybe you're depressed, and people are just, it feels dissatisfying. People feel like they're being dismissed, but in reality, we're still talking about a biological process,
Mhm.
and a biological process that we need to address.
Yeah, and in some ways, and this sounds a little woo-woo, but, like, it is your body trying to tell you something, right? It's
It
like,
is.
oh, maybe you're having trouble with your stomach or whatever is going on
Yeah.
there, not because you have an underlying disease, but because you actually are being emotionally affected, and the emotional state you're in is affecting you physiologically and vice versa, you know? So,
Yeah.
to answer your question, I think there's real value in kind of tuning into your physical sensations and getting curious about them, and
Yeah.
then trying to begin to notice, how do you feel physically during particular activities or after
Yeah.
particular activities compared to other ones. And so
Yeah.
one term I've heard used colloquially that I think is actually quite interesting is like email apnea or like work apnea,
Oh.
where
Mhm.
you're not actually breathing as deeply when you're looking at your screen or you're doing your work compared to when
Mhm.
you're laughing with friends, for example, or playing with your
Yeah.
dog or with your kid or just doing something in real life. Like that's an
Yeah.
interesting piece of information to start to begin to pay attention to. You could even set a little reminder for yourself or something to
Mhm.
check in about this. But when's the last time you took a deep breath and like, what are
Yeah.
you doing? Or ask yourself, okay, I did just spend 20 minutes in bed scrolling through the news, but at the very first thing of my day, like at the beginning of my
Yeah.
day, how do I feel? Like, how do and not just emotionally in my brain, how does my body feel? And then really make a point, I would say also to experiment with doing more things that involve your whole body that we're because
Mhm.
we're not just brains that sit on
Mhm.
bodies. There's a whole thing here. And I'm saying
Yeah.
this to myself as much as I am
Yeah.
saying it to people listening. Like
Yeah.
I've been trying to do this myself by doing more dance stuff, and this is somewhat tangential, but I think related. It's like the other day I went to a Balboa workshop, and I don't know if anyone knows what Balboa is. It's a version of swing dancing, but where swing dancing is kind of like more energetic and push and pull with your partner. It's very playful. Balboa was developed in part to deal with really fast swing songs, and it basically is a very close dance where you're connected to your partner's torso and
Mm.
you dance in that way. But I went to this workshop, and like as opposed to tango or something where it's very
Mhm.
sensual and all that,
Mhm.
that's not what Balboa is. It's about being comfy and like very
Uh-huh.
connected to your partner. Which, by the way, side note, fascinating. When's the last time you did anything where the goal was to be comfy and connected? I love that. But
Yeah. Yeah.
we spent the whole first part of this workshop, I kid you not, literally going around a circle and, like, hugging each other. They're like,
Oh, I
"Okay,
love that.
give your partner a hug, and while you're in the hug, like, exhale and try to feel your body sink into itself and sink into the floor and, like, ground yourself," right? And this is, like,
Yeah.
definitely not what I normally do on a Monday night, but I went around this circle and we just hugged each other, and eventually we graduated to, like, hugging and doing a basic step side to side. And it was really interesting as an experience to begin with, just to actually tune in a conscious way
Yeah.
to my body and be like, "Oh, I did have my shoulders creep up." And if I
Mhm.
feel disconnected from my partner, it's like, "Oh, maybe I let that tension come back into it." And
Mhm.
I think the reason I'm telling you the story is that afterwards, it was really interesting. So it was a half hour away from my house. I spent the first half of the way out there singing, along to
Yeah.
my car
Right.
radio as one does, but I don't actually have a great singing voice, and it's hard for me to project in my chest voice. And then I'm driving back and I'm doing the same thing, and I'm like, this is so much easier for me to sing. Like, what is going on? And I'm like, oh, that's because my body reacted to that activity
Yeah.
I just did. I am actually more grounded and more relaxed in a way that's very different from my workday where
Mhm.
I am sitting in front of a computer screen, typing emails, or I mean, right now I feel relaxed. I'm enjoying our conversation. But like, a lot
Right.
of times if you're doing an interview on Zoom, you're very hyper conscious of how you look or what the conversation is,
Mhm.
and there's this tension. So
Mhm.
all this to say, to very long answer to your question, I think it's interesting and useful to just start to pay more attention to what your body is telling you during and after the activities throughout your day and trying to figure out which ones actually make you feel good, not just mentally, but physically. as
Yeah.
well.
I actually spend a lot of time telling people to collect I always call it collecting data on yourself.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the most useful things we can do, not just for our health, but sort of our overall well-being too. Although
Mhm.
certainly our mental health and physical health are intimately connected and influence one another greatly.
Yeah.
Um, but I do think that we don't spend enough time collecting data on ourselves and really taking stock of introspectively thinking a little bit about how do I really feel.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
I
so
completely
it,
agree. Yeah, collecting
yeah,
information and then and I like that phrasing too because it's non-judgmental, you're just
yeah,
not trying to beat yourself up for the fact that, oh, you just realized you haven't taken a deep breath in the past 45 minutes because you've been
right,
looking at the news.
right.
It's more like, oh, that's interesting. I opened this app and now my body is telling me like I'm actually not breathing deeply. I don't
Yeah,
really feel very good. And maybe that's a little bit of a nudge you need to experiment with or get curious about trying something different with your morning the
yeah,
next day. I would say
yeah.
practical advice, people, please get your phones out of your bedroom.
I know.
Like experiment. We're doing this. What's today? Today's Wednesday. Just try it through
Today's
the
Wednesday.
weekend. Yeah, thank you. And see what happens. Get yourself an alarm clock and like just do these little experiments where you can kind of play around with your daily routines and then as you're saying, just get curious about the information your body or your experience is giving you about like how that's affecting you because as we're
Mhm.
talking about whatever you're feeling in your mind probably is related to something going on in your body too.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. So as a physician, I have to take call for our practice. And so on the nights when I'm on call, I have to have my phone at my bedside because I have to respond if there's an emergency. It's a requirement of my job. But when
Mhm.
I am not on call, I do not keep my phone at my bedside. It's actually plugged in another room. And it is a completely different experience. Now, I'm also on call and I know that I may be woken up for an emergency that I need to respond to. So probably my brain is also just in a little bit of a different headspace. But I think just the presence of the phone, despite the call, makes the
Mhm.
call or otherwise makes a huge difference.
Yeah, the presence of the phone, you will be aware of that, I think, on a
Yeah.
subconscious level. I mean, I would say
Yeah.
I would be not that you asked me to try to offer a solution to this, but
I'm always happy to take in for to take
okay.
advice.
I'm just wondering, like, well, 2 ideas. One is this wouldn't solve the issue of just the presence of the phone being a
Yeah.
distra or affecting you, but I love app blockers, like,
Oh,
using
yeah,
something
yeah, yeah.
like Brick or
Yep.
Opal, to, like,
Yep.
block everything but that. But
Yeah.
also, I had a similar or have a sim many people, I think, have a situation in which they feel they can't get their phone out of the bedroom in general because of that, like, what if call, and I understand
Right.
your job literally has, like, those calls come
There's
through
like
because that is
literal
your job.
requirement. Yeah.
There's a little requirement. But in a more general sense, what I
Yeah.
encourage people to do is say, okay, let's figure out how to manage that anxiety.
Yeah.
Like what you're really saying is that you feel anxious. And so you feel like
Yeah.
you can't get your phone out of the bedroom. Now, in a
Right.
situation with someone who's not a physician who's on call, you can say, okay, what's the worst case scenario? Like, what is that
Yeah.
call that you're worrying about? And I actually asked this once to Vivek Murthy, the former US Surgeon
Yeah.
General. And he was like, it's a call from his elderly parents,
Yeah.
as is true for many of us at this stage of life. And he said, well, no, I asked him, I was like, well, have you ever gotten that call? And he
Mm.
said, I did once. And I was like, well, that's really interesting, because that is one time. But how many nights has your phone been in your bedroom? How many like hours has it been there where you didn't get the call? And is there any way to create a system where you wouldn't miss the call, but you don't have to have the downside of having the negative,
Right.
negative parts of having your phone there? And for me and my husband, sometimes what we do, like if we want to take a break from our smartphones on the weekends, for
Yeah.
example, we have a house phone. So we got a phone that works over the internet,
Yep.
which by the way is like very cheap. You buy the phone and technically you don't need to pay for service if all you want to do is call.
Yep.
But we want call forwarding. So I think it's $10 a month. So it's really not very much, especially compared to a smartphone. And you could just have the phone for the calls forwarded to that other line so that you
Uh-huh.
don't miss that call. Or you can create a list of VIP contacts and you can have the
Right.
phone's ringer on. Everything else is blocked and only those calls would come through. Or in your case, you could just have the hospital's number and then leave it
Right.
like in the
Right.
bathroom or somewhere where you'll
Right.
hear it, but it's
Hear
not
it.
right there. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I'm not
Exactly.
saying
I love
I don't
that
know.
idea.
Yeah, and you
Mm.
might feel totally fine about what you're doing, but I offer that just in general because I find for a lot of people, I hear often like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I really wish I could do that, but,"
Right.
and it's like, well, what's the but? Because it's probably an anxiety, but you're
Yep.
also like, probably a smart person who can like think. Let's think through like how could
Yeah.
we? work through that anxiety and create a solution where
Yeah.
you feel that that is covered or you've worked through it,
Yeah.
and you also get the benefits of not feeling as tethered to the device.
I love that. I love that because I do think that there's lots of excuses that we make to be because, to say that we need to be tethered to the device. So,
And it's partially just 'cause we're so stressed out though, right? It's like not like a
mm,
conscious, like I'm trying to make an excuse. It's like literally your brain is stressed out. And so if you're
yeah.
like, okay, if someone challenges you for this behavior and you're stressed out, you're going to find a reason to justify what you're
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like
Yeah.
goes back to what we're talking about that a lot of us are in this default kind of high stress state all the
Yeah.
time. And
Yeah.
especially so as you're saying that I now know thanks to my declining stock of eggs and my FSH levels. Thanks,
Ex-
Julian.
exactly. Sorry about that.
Perimenopause is like the gift that keeps on giving.
The one thing I always tell people about perimenopause is that it ends and people feel this resurgence afterwards. So there's hope later.
Interesting. I'll believe it when I get there. That's
Okay. All right. All right. Fair enough. I appreciate the skepticism. Um, in in the time that we have left today, I'd love to transition a little bit to talk about some of the newer work that you've done and to talk about, many of us in midlife also have teens and tweens and young adult kids. I myself, I am the mother of 4 kids who are 18 to 10, so solidly in those, like, teen and tween years.
Yeah. How are your
Um,
cortisol levels?
I'm gonna say at the moment that they are high. If you could see, you would see that I've got, like, 3 signs around my house right now because this is my kids are coming home from school right now, and they all say, "Shh, mom is recording."
Oh my God, that's so funny. Yeah.
Um, but but one of the things, we as parents are left to do is navigate technology with our kids. And we're navigating technology with kids who, in many cases, are much more facile at it than we are. Um, and so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how to think about that, how to approach that, um, and what we can do sort of like positively. I know what we do in our family. We have specific times that are phone free times. And we've had very specific and pretty strict social media rules specifically around like platforms like Instagram. But talk about other things that we can do and ways that we can kind of think through this. And more than that, like get our teens and tweens on board, which I think is sometimes the hardest part.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the hardest parts. Yeah, and just to say before I get to the positive stuff and the social media thing, I do think it's important for parents to recognize that it's not really a matter of willpower or self-control for kids or even the amount of time they're spending on it, although that is horrifying. It's like upwards of 5 hours, 7 hours a day for many people.
Oh,
But those platforms are just inherently unsafe for
yeah.
kids. So I think regard because a lot of people will be like, it depends on your kid and how much, how mature they are. And it's like, no, actually, like social media is not safe. Like there's people selling drugs on Instagram, Snapchat, there's sexual predators, there's like violent videos, there's self-harm content. So I just want to put that out there. But positive note. So I
Yeah.
wrote a book, as I was saying, the
Yeah.
new book, The Amazing
Yeah.
Generation, I co-wrote with Jonathan Haidt of The Anxious
Yeah.
Generation. And the goal was exactly what you're asking about. It was basically like,
Mhm.
how do we get on the same page as our kids? And how
Yeah.
do we educate our kids about technology and set them up for a healthy relationship so that honestly they don't make some of the same mistakes that we did and they certainly
Mhm.
hopefully won't make the same mistakes that Gen Z, 18 to 27-year-olds show. The generation above our kids, or I guess
Yeah.
in your case you'd have one in that
Just
band,
barely.
but
He's on the cusp.
barely on the cusp. Yeah, not the anxious generation. um, and so basically I think it's important to well, first of all, it's a practical thing. That's what has been amazing. It was the goal of this book when I was working on it, and it has been the response is that parents have reported that having their kids read this, so just leaving it out and having their
Yeah.
kids read it has resulted in their kids changing how they think about social media and smartphones, and in many cases saying like, "I actually don't want to spend
Mm.
my time on social media, and I don't actually want a smartphone," and also
Mhm.
helping their parents with their relationships. And they've said things like, "For the first time ever, I feel like my kids and I are on the same
Mm.
page. We're on the same
Yeah.
side."
Yeah.
And I think that's actually true because in reality, like this is an issue. screens and phones and social media and video games are an issue where it shouldn't be us versus our kids. It should be all of us versus the tech companies that
Yeah.
are trying to steal our time and attention. So as a brief preview of the book, and then I'll talk about something specific I think is useful. Like
Yeah.
it's written, John
Yeah.
was insistent
Yep.
we have it in full color, which is great. It's got a
Yeah.
graphic novel. It's got all these little,
Yeah.
honestly, this is ironic, but like dopamine triggers in this book. It's like take that slot machine and meta.
Exactly.
Yeah, you want to. There is a look at those colors. We're so
Yeah.
sneaky. Anyway, it's meant to work on multiple levels and be absorbable and relatable, like for kids as young as fourth grade, but we've heard from a lot of adults too. But to answer your question, I think that my most useful piece of advice, given that we're also talking about how we as adults can thrive in addition to
Mhm.
helping our kids thrive, is actually this Rebels code that we have on the back of the book. So part of the premise of this book is that there are these tech companies that are trying to manipulate, and they have manipulated all of us, especially people our age and like Gen Z, into spending all our time on their products. But there also is this growing rebellion of people, many of whom are younger people, who are standing up and saying, this is not how I want to live. I want to have more real life experiences and more time in person with people having actual fun, real, true fun, as I call it. And we tried to distill their kind of guiding principles down into just two things you can follow. And I think that these are applicable to adults too. So the Rebels
Mhm.
Code is to use technology as a tool, but
Mhm.
not let technology use you. So it's not
Mhm.
to say that we're totally anti-tech, but there's ways in which
Sure.
tech is useful, like right now.
We're using tech
Um,
right now. We would
we're using
never
it
be able to have this conversation in the past.
exactly. With that said, would it be more fun if we were in person?
Yeah.
100%,
Yeah.
right? Like, but
Logistically more challenging, but
logistically more challenging, ultimately more satisfying. But
yes.
then the second part of this Rebels Code is to fill your life with more real friendship, real freedom, and real fun. And the reason we have real in front of that is because one thing I realized when working on this book is that one of the main reasons that teenagers, but also honestly people of all ages are so drawn to spend time on social media in particular is
Mhm.
that the companies have made us believe that they're going to connect us to our
Mhm.
friends. They're going to help us have freedom. So, in the case of a young person, like the freedom to explore their own interests, develop their own identity, have independence from their parents, right? And that they're going to be fun. Like if you watch
Yeah.
phone ads, like they look like they're having a great time. It doesn't really
Don't
match up
they?
with what people look like in real life when they're glued to their phone. But what I came to realize is that wanting to have more friendship and freedom and fun is completely developmentally appropriate for a tween or teenager,
Yeah.
right? And it makes sense they're going to want to spend time on screens if they don't have the opportunity for those things in real life. But it also is what all of us want. Like humans
Yeah.
need to feel socially connected. We need relationships and friendships. And it's kind of tragic to think we've been manipulated into believing that you can get that through an Instagram feed. Like a follower is
Yeah.
not the same thing as a friend. And DMing an actual friend isn't the same as being a person. And we also,
Yeah.
unfortunately, like have built this culture at this point where it is harder to find real life
Yeah.
experiences. But
Yeah.
also, I say this to kids, but it's true for adults too. Is it really freedom to explore your own interests if they're being defined by algorithmically
Right.
driven content that's
Yes.
telling you how to behave, what to buy, and how
Yes.
to think? And
Yeah.
also, in the case of kids, like it's not really free, or any of us, it's not really freedom if you feel that you can't leave the house or like go to the bathroom without your phone. Like that's not
Yeah.
freedom.
Yeah.
And then in terms of fun, I can go on, but my book, The Power of Fun, is all about like what
Yes.
fun actually is and
Yeah.
how important what I consider to be true fun, this energizing, nourishing, life
Yeah.
affirming state that we can only experience in real life with other people is like that's very different from fake fun that we experience by just consuming content and being passively entertained on screens. So to answer
Yeah.
your question, I think the reason we're getting positive feedback from families on this book is it is exposing the truth that this is a
Mhm.
problem that all of us are facing and we actually
Yeah.
are on the same side as our kids. And
Yeah.
one way to get your kids buy-in on that, I would say if they read this book, it's like or just leave it out, see what happens, but ask
Yeah.
them, can you tell me something about my own screen habits? Can you help me? Because I feel like I want to have better habits around technology and I want to feel more
Yeah.
connected and more alive. Like help me because that
Mhm.
really levels the playing field, which I think is very important. And I'd
Well,
also
and
say
kids
just
love that too because they also
yes,
love the opportunity to give the adults in their life feedback. And we don't
feedback is a
solicit it
gentle
very
term.
often. Isn't
We'll
it
say
though? Isn't it though?
yes. Have some feedback, not criticism, feedback. Totally. And I also just think like that those tenets of the Rebels Code of use technology
Mhm.
as a tool, don't let it use you, and then fill your life with more friendship, freedom, and fun. Even if you don't have a kid, like those are
Yeah.
really useful things for us as adults to use as guiding principles, I think. It's really what I try to
Absolutely.
do. And it's a, it's a struggle and it takes work. It
Mm,
especially takes work to fill your life with the real good stuff because we are all so busy and stressed out. But just imagine how much time you'd have if you didn't spend that time in the morning scrolling through
I
your
know.
phone. Like I've started I mean I wrote these books to help myself, because I was spending more time than I wanted to on my phone. And then I spent less time on my phone and I didn't know what to do with my time. So I started to pursue things that led me
Yeah.
to write The Power of Fun. But it's just amazing to realize the opportunity cost. And
Yeah.
like, I've started taking piano lessons again, and it's like
Oh,
I
I
have
love that.
yeah, like, with a friend on Thursday mornings, so, it's an hour and a half in the morning, we take a piano lesson, and it's like, how the hell do I have time to do that on a Thursday morning? Well, I find plenty of time or used to find plenty of time to compulsively read the news,
Mhm,
and I can tell you I
mhm.
feel a heck of a lot better after an
Yeah,
hour and a half piano lesson,
it's
and
so
then the rest
true.
of my day is more productive. So,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
offer that as an example.
I love
Yeah.
that. I love that example. We, I music is such an important, the way music affects our brain, I think is really fascinating. But I think one of the things I'd love to end on is sort of this idea of how important human connection is. So one of the things that I get asked constantly is how can I like stay healthy um into the future? What are the things I can do now in midlife so that I have lead this long healthy life? Not just
Yeah.
this long life, but you want to be functional and with it and whatever. Um, and I always joke that they should take a play out of my grandmother's playbook. She lived to be 99.
Wow.
Um, and she lived a very moderate life, but she did some really important things. And one of the things that she always did was surround herself with friends and her very large family. And when you look at the data on aging and dementia, people, it rewires our brain when we are isolated versus in community with people. And so it's literally changing the wiring in our brain when we interact with others, when we surround ourselves with people that we enjoy being with and enjoy spending time with, and that it pays dividends, like, for our entire lives. So, I think
Mhm.
it's a really important, um, message to hammer home. People
Yeah.
people are meant to be in connection and community with one another.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm curious, before we wrap up, can you share a little
Yeah,
of your thoughts about why music in particular is so powerful? As a side note, I would say like
yeah,
connection can be hard to manufacture, like especially if I have a
mhm,
very small family, right? It's like, but
yeah,
I do think it's important to prioritize it and you can seek
yeah,
it out in more kind of if you can't have it in organically. Like I love taking classes or I love actually having an
yeah.
activity that brings people together. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on music, but I'd also add before you share those that there's been a lot of interesting research recently I've seen about dancing in particular. So I
Oh,
guess
yeah,
Balboa was for my health, but,
yeah,
like, about
there you
that really
go.
is there we go. I mean, that was totally worth it, but can you speak a little bit about music?
So I am not a neurologist and to be completely honest, but there are aspects of music and the way our brains interact with music and the pattern of music. Music is very mathematical. We don't think of it as being very mathematical. We think of it as being creative, but it's very mathematical. And the relationship of the notes and how we lay down the memory of that sound in our brain is very it gets laid down very deeply, but and so people can access very old memories through music in ways that they can't access memories that are not associated with music. There's a woman that goes to my church and she unfortunately has dementia. She comes and with her husband and sit and she can sing every hymn we sing every Sunday from memory, like all the verses. And it's all in there and it's all laid down. And the the sort of what happens in our brain when we recall sort of those positive memories is it's it's as good as if we were living it again, like, it's as beneficial as if we were living it again, and so I think that music has this sort of um, primal connection for us because we can access things that we memories and feelings that we can't access otherwise.
Yeah, that's interesting. It reminds me of, Tony Bennett, where he the
Yeah,
same, but he was able to remember, like, he did a performance that you may know with Lady Gaga, and he was able
yeah,
to, like, perform and sing these songs when he
yeah,
really couldn't. It's fascinating. I would also say there's, interesting research about what happens to us when we play music with other people, and I
yes,
remember reading a study, I think it was Swedish, but I'm not sure, about, choir singers and how
yeah,
you actually do start to get in sync in terms of your heartbeat, and, like,
mhm,
there's an actual physiological, like,
yeah,
connection that happens because probably you're
yeah,
I mean, you literally are following the same rhythm, and their body kind of falls into that. Probably
yeah,
also explains why I was so relaxed after that Balboa thing, right? After just, like,
exactly,
bouncing back and forth while hugging strangers, but,
e
anyway.
exactly,
But I think the theme here
exactly,
is that, like, that stuff feels better than what we're doing on our screens, and
yeah,
if we're especially stressed out because we're, midlife women, like, I think
yes,
we need to. I guess the thing I would say is, like, these types of opportunities are not going to pop up for us without
yeah,
us trying. Like,
yeah,
spontaneity and midlife don't seem to go very well. They don't often pop up in the same sentence. It's
they
less frequent for
don't.
those to come up than it is to start a conversation about estrogen and cortisol, which is saying a lot. So
I
if
know,
you're listening, like, we all need to prioritize
yeah,
that for ourselves, and I encourage
yeah,
anyone listening to, like, support the other women and men, everybody in your life, but, like, support
yeah,
each other in making time for these things. I'm so grateful to my husband for supporting, watching our daughter while I go and hug strangers at the Balboa thing, like, and I'm, like, a
I
better
love that.
person, a better parent for it, and just more
Yeah,
satisfied. So anyway, please, guys, like, do recognize that we need to take care of ourselves in that way, and that screen time's probably not gonna fill you up in the way that we really truly need, especially during this period of our lives.
well, I think that's a great place to end. This has been such a delight. I'm so glad that we had got to have this conversation. I hope it's the first of many.
Me too.
And
There's so many more hormones to discuss. I mean,
I know we didn't even get to insulin or
I know.
there's
Oh,
so many more that we can talk about. But this was really wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me. Um, and thank you to everyone who joined us. Do you just want to let everybody know again where they can find you?
sure, yeah, so I write the How to Feel Alive Substack newsletter, which I hope you'll join me for, and Julian, I hope you'll come on my Substack, newsletter, like, podcast as well, and then the books we were talking about, again, I have them on my desk because 'cause I've been doing this. So, How to Break Up with Your
Yeah,
Phone and The Power of Fun and The Amazing Generation, and, I have resources for all of those on my actual website, which is katherineprice.com. Um,
wonderful.
yes, and I wanna you gotta keep in touch with me about your book because I wanna
Yeah.
read it and help share that with my audience.
Well,
There we
it's
go.
here. It's called The Hormone Loop, and it is out June 2nd.
June, wow, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So, yes, and I rate my Substack at The Savvy Patient. So, thank you so much to everyone for joining us, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.